Story 1. Chemical Warfare.
What is that?
Francis whined from the back seat of the SUV.
Daddy, what is that? Do you know what it is?
Paul was sobbing in the seat next to her. But Francis was too busy staring out the windshield to comfort her little brother. I couldn't blame her. The yellow cloud that rolled towards us, obscuring the landscape, was like nothing I'd ever seen before. I leaned over the steering wheel, staring.
It's gonna be okay. We're almost home.
It reminded me of footage from the Middle East, where dust storms would kick up and send a wall of dust racing across the landscape, miles wide and 1,000 feet high. Denise was leaning diagonally from her seat, reaching back over the center console to grab Paul's hand in some semblance of comfort. But even she didn't keep her attention fully on our distraught son for long.
Maybe we should turn around,
Denise said to me, struggling to keep the fear out of her voice.
You saw the alert. Bombs could drop at any moment. What do we pay all that money for if we're not going to even use the bunker? What if the stuff is poison?
She whispered, so as not to scare the kids.
I've never heard of any weapon like that, and I would have. America stays on top of stuff like that. Besides, chemical warfare is outlawed by the Geneva Convention.
Still, as we approached the cloud, I turned off the air conditioner and slapped shut the vents within reach.
Kids, close your vents back there, okay?
I glanced into the rearview mirror. Both my teenage daughter and my preteen son were lost in their own little worlds. Francis staring out the window, and Paul still crying.
Francis!
I snapped. She turned and looked into the mirror.
Shut the vents back there, all of them.
Thankfully, the roads weren't too clogged, although many people were driving crazily. We'd seen several accidents already, but we were approaching our house on the 2-lane road now. I couldn't imagine what it was like in the city. Sheer chaos, probably. As I spotted our mailbox up ahead, one that Denise had made herself to look like a barn, I was overwhelmed with appreciation that we had moved out here to the country just after Paul was born. While we turned down the driveway, the yellow dust cloud enveloped the car. A smell like burning maple syrup with an undertone of bleach invaded the vehicle as I raced down our dirt driveway.
What's that smell?
Francis asked. I punched the garage door opener. Moments later, after the SUV was parked snugly next to Denise's Audi, I punched it again and watched the door close behind us. I shut the engine off. The ground vibrated from an explosion in the distance. It was really happening. America was under attack. I turned in my seat and looked at each member of my family as we unbuckled our seatbelts.
Okay, let's get to the bunker. Don't bring anything, only what you have on you. We have everything we need down there. We'll do it on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
In unison, we all jumped out of the SUV and raced into the house. Moments later, we were all in the basement, and I was punching in the code to the reinforced bunker door. The syrup bleach smell lingered in my nostrils as I ushered my frightened family inside. As I pulled the door closed behind us, another explosion shook the ground. This one was much closer. The lights in the bunker flickered and then snapped off, leaving us in utter darkness. Francis and Paul screamed. I wobbled, standing up from the couch where Denise, Francis, and Paul were huddled.
Are you okay?
Denise asked, taking her arm from around Francis and grabbing my wrist.
Yeah, just low blood sugar,
I lied. I hadn't expected the power grid to go down so quickly, but whoever attacked us had apparently hit a power station just as we'd stepped into the bunker. It was a miracle no one had fallen down the hard metal stairs. Thankfully, I had gotten my phone out, and together, Denise and I worked to comfort our kids at the top of the staircase. A few moments later, the self-contained, solar-powered generator kicked on. Emergency LEDs came to life, illuminating the stairwell, allowing us to walk safely down to the common room. That was 20 minutes ago. Now, I needed to get the strange syrup bleach taste out of my mouth. The bunker wasn't huge by any means, It consisted of 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a large storage room filled with supplies, a common room, and a small kitchen. Blinking and shaking my head, I tottered over to the kitchen, directly across from the common room. A turn of the handle had cold water flowing into the kitchen sink. I cupped some in my hands and splashed it over my face. Ever since getting down into the bunker, I had been feeling odd, tingly all over, and with a strange ball of dread in my stomach. The dread seemed separate from the fear I knew was normal during such an event. We were under attack by some unknown force, so it was normal to be afraid. But we were safe, and we could survive for a year in this bunker. Plus, I had every confidence in the might of the United States Armed Forces. The ball of dread in my gut had a distinctly different flavor from the general fear I was feeling at the sudden attack. I just couldn't place it. Like something dark and awful was forming deep inside me, and there was nothing I could do about it. The water helped. I pulled some into my mouth and allowed it to go up my nose so I could get rid of that syrup bleach scent that had been with me since that yellow cloud of what? Dust? Yellow dust?
Mark?
I jerked, straightening quickly and looking at Denise, who stood in the half-light between the kitchen and common room. Over her shoulder, I could see the kids huddled together, staring at us with terror-stricken faces.
What? You okay?
Denise took a small step toward me and reached out with one hand, but she didn't touch me. Water dripped from my face, soaking the collar of my shirt.
I'm fine. Why? You've been standing over the sink for almost 5 minutes.
I scoffed.
What? No, I haven't. What's wrong with you, Mark?
Denise asked, taking a step back, her tone sharp.
Nothing,
I said.
Mark!
Denise shrieked, cowering and backpedaling.
Mark, what's wrong with you?
Behind her, Francis and Paul both started screaming. The dread in my stomach expanded, sending tendrils of pain through me. Shouting, I doubled over, wrenching my eyes shut in pain.
Mark, no!
Denise screamed. I straightened and saw that Denise was standing next to the couch with an arm around each of our 2 children. They all looked completely terrified, their eyes seeming too large, their mouths too wide as they screamed and cried. But Denise's face changed as she leaned down toward Paul.
Mark, what's wrong with you?
She cried again, but she was smiling now, smiling until she opened her mouth and put her teeth against the curve of Paul's head. The dread expanded again, feeling much bigger now, like it was taking over. This time, the pain was distant. I was too focused on what Denise was doing to pay it much attention. My wife steadied Paul's head with one hand and bit into his skull. Although she didn't break through the bone, she came away with a piece of his scalp in her mouth, jerking her head away as blood poured and my son screamed.
No, you bitch!
I shouted, rushing toward the 3 of them. They darted toward the stairwell, Denise bringing up the rear. But I caught up to them quickly enough. Denise was about halfway up the metal stairs when I reached out and grabbed her foot, yanking it as hard as I could. Her other leg straightened and then stretched out before her as I pulled her backward. She hit the stairs doing the splits, and I heard something in her other leg give way with a wet crunch. She screamed, but I kept pulling her leg. I dragged her to the bottom of the stairwell, appalled that she could ever hurt one of our children. I couldn't understand how she could do such a thing, and I knew I had to stop her. The dread swelled as I pulled her around the corner from the stairwell so the kids wouldn't see what I had to do. Denise screamed and fought as I shifted her leg under my armpit so she couldn't use it. I kept her face down to prevent her from effectively using her hands. I shifted forward, bending her back awkwardly, and slammed my foot down on the back of her neck. As a much bigger person than her, I had no problem keeping her leg clutched tightly in my armpit while I bore down with my foot, putting most of my weight through that limb. She kept fighting. Afraid one of the kids would come down into the common room and see, I decided to speed things up. I brought my foot off her neck and slammed it down again, feeling something crunch in her throat. She kept fighting, so I did it again and again, stomping on the back of her neck until she went limp. Huffing and sweating, I dropped her leg to the floor and looked around. momentarily confused. There was no more screaming. The bunker was silent except for my huffing and a sound like stomping on metal grates. Through the haze in my mind came the memory of my kids. Of course! I hurried over, remembering what Denise had done to Paul. I wanted to make sure he was okay and tend to his wound. But as I rounded the corner, a loud metal clatter came from the staircase. My daughter's body tumbled down the last few steps and came to rest at my feet. I stared down at her, unsure whether she was unconscious or dead. Her eyes were closed, and blood trickled from a gash in her forehead, surely from hitting the corner of a metal step on her way down. I dropped to my knees next to her, but before I could feel for a pulse, Paul shouted down from the top of the stairs,
Don't touch her! She's infected!
I flinched away from my daughter.
Infected? She tried to infect me!
Paul said.
So I pushed her!
I still hadn't taken my eyes off my daughter, but I saw what Paul was talking about now. She was infected. Something like black mold grew in pulsating splotches on her skin. Giving her a wide berth, I headed up the stairs and grabbed Paul by the shoulders.
Are you okay? Yeah, she didn't infect me. It's okay.
I looked at the side of his head, where my wife had bitten him, but there was no wound. I shook my head, confused. The mass of dread inside me pulsed, this time feeling like it was crowding all my internal organs against my ribs and flesh. My confusion seemed to float away. What mattered was that Paul was okay.
Let's go back down,
I said.
We have to stay down here, so we don't get infected too.
Paul gaped at me, but he said nothing. I took his hand and led him down the stairs. We moved past Francis's and Denise's bodies, sure to keep away from them. Denise, it seemed, was infected too. Yes, that was why I'd had to kill her. She would have infected me. I led Paul to the master bedroom and shut the door behind us.
There, we'll be safe in here.
Paul got somberly onto the bed. I sat on the other side of it, elbows on knees, as I faced the door, just in case. We sat in silence for a long time.
Dad?
Paul asked, voice choked with emotion.
Yeah? What's wrong with you? What are you talking about?
I asked, straightening and looking over my shoulder at my son. He was no longer sitting on the bed. He cowered in the corner, staring at me like I was a monster.
What's wrong with you?
He screamed.
Why did you kill Denise and Francis? Quiet,
I said, looking around.
They'll hear you. Dad! Dad, no! Dad, why did you kill them?
I looked at the bedroom door, feeling like the entire inside of my body was swelling out, stretching my skin. He's trying to get us caught, I thought. He wants us to get caught, because he's one of them.
Dad?
Quiet, I hissed, crawling across the bed toward my son in the corner. He only screamed louder.
They'll hear you,
I said, clamping one hand over his mouth and the other around his tiny throat. He screamed against my palm. It was too loud, much too loud. I squeezed and pushed him down to the floor. The stench of burning syrup and bleach remained in my nostrils as my son took his final breath. Then I was alone in the room, safe at last. I left Paul where he was and walked toward the door, thinking I needed something to eat. But as I approached the bedroom door, I passed a mirror on the wall. Jerking to a stop, I turned slowly and peered into the mirror. When I saw the person looking back at me, I screamed. Story 2. We found an underground bunker. Something evil lives in it.
I don't think there's supposed to be a road here.
I looked left and right down the narrow dirt road, wondering if we'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. Saul came crashing out of the brush behind me. I turned to look at him as I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Huffing, he yanked a severed pine branch from where it had snagged in his backpack strap and threw it angrily to the road.
I thought we were supposed to be following a trail. You've had me bushwhacking for the last 2 miles.
I couldn't help but smile.
There's a trail. You're just too damn big for it.
My half-brother brushed pine needles off him and shook his enormous head angrily. As a lineman for a Division I football team, it wasn't the hiking that got to him. It was the fighting his way through the trees.
How about we take this road for a while?
He suggested.
See where it goes. We can mark the trail here and come back to it.
I studied the map I'd downloaded onto my phone, unable to find any sign of a dirt road. Weeds and grass grew in a line up the center, indicating that it was in disuse. Taking pity on my brother, I agreed, and we started up the road. Not even a mile later, the road dead-ended at a wall of granite with a huge, rusted door set in the middle of it. Stopping in the middle of the road, Saul and I shared a look of excitement.
We have to check it out,
Saul said.
It's not every day you stumble across a freaking underground bunker.
I couldn't have agreed more. I smiled and started forward. The door was hinged on each side, so it would open in the middle. One was fully closed, while the other was open about a foot. There was a complicated-looking metal handle on one side and a locking mechanism on the other, complete with a ring that would lock the two components in place when the doors were flush with each other. But there was no sign of any chain or lock anywhere. Still, I glanced at the ground and saw some tracks. I stuck a hand out and stopped my brother before we trampled them.
Look.
Imprints had been left in the dirt under the slight overhang that would keep that patch of ground out of the rain. The prints had been left by what looked like a pair of hiking boots.
I guess we aren't the first here,
Saul said, starting forward. Before I could stop him, he trampled the prints and opened one side of the door wide on squealing hinges. Shaking my head, I decided I was overreacting, my imagination getting the better of me. But I could have sworn the tracks only led inside. There were none coming out. The crunching of dirt under our boots soon gave way to the muted slap of synthetic rubber on concrete. About 20 yards into the bunker, the space opened up on our right in a large parking area. The walls were concrete, and large concrete pillars stood in a line, holding the ceiling up a good 15 feet overhead. The only vehicle in the place was an ancient-looking World War II-era Jeep. It sat on cinder blocks, its tires long gone. The hood stood propped open like the mouth of some prehistoric creature that had been fossilized and long ago entombed from its stony grave. We ventured over, our footsteps echoing down the corridor that stretched before us, off into a black void. The only thing left in the Jeep's engine compartment was the engine itself. Everything else had been stripped out, probably shortly after the Second World War ended. Saul slipped his backpack off and propped it against the Jeep. In the light coming through the door, I could see his smile.
What are you doing? Let's explore for a bit. Leave our packs here to give our shoulders a break.
I looked into the dark distance, thinking about the boot prints. I was being ridiculous. I just didn't see the outgoing prints, that was all. Besides, Saul was with me. While I was pretty average in every way, Saul could handle all comers. I'd seen the guy squat over 500 pounds before. He had hands the size of baseball mitts.
Yeah, okay.
I slid my pack off and dug out my flashlight. Saul got his flashlight out, and we ventured farther into the bunker, breathing the stale air and holding the dark back as we went. We heard the noise shortly after reaching the second floor down. The first floor, where we'd come in, held the parking area and a couple of offices before bottlenecking to a heavy-duty door next to a large elevator, both protected by a couple of Jersey barriers. I figured this place had been built for some heavy hitters in case of a bombing or an invasion. The Jersey barriers were where the foot soldiers would crouch to fire at the enemy, preventing them from getting to the door or elevator, the last line of defense. With no power, the elevator didn't work, but the door was standing open. Beyond was a stairwell that led down to another floor we were determined to explore. But as soon as we stepped foot on the second floor, we heard a strange noise that caused my skin to tighten. It sounded at first like a snicker, like something was laughing at us. When it repeated, I realized it wasn't someone laughing. Quite the opposite. It was someone sobbing in such an odd and sped-up manner that it sounded like a hyena laughing. Both Saul and I whipped our flashlights toward where we thought the source of the noise was. We stood in a narrow concrete hall that stretched both left and right, with doorways branching off it at regular intervals. Our flashlights were trained to the right, but they couldn't reach far enough to see the end of the hallway.
Hello?
Saul shouted, causing me to jump.
What are you doing?
I whispered, grabbing his arm. He looked at me like I was insane.
Someone's hurt. We don't know that. What if what?
He asked.
Help me!
I jumped again at the hoarse and pain-filled male voice that echoed off the cold concrete walls. Without another word to me, Saul started off down the hall.
I'm coming!
Admonishing myself for my cowardice, I hustled after Saul. But it wasn't out of any altruistic intention. I wanted to stay close to him because I knew he could defend himself.
Where are you?
He shouted as I caught up to him.
Down here!
The man called.
In the bathroom!
Something clunked in the hallway behind us. We whipped around and pointed our flashlights that way, seeing nothing but empty hallway and dark doorways.
Hello?
Saul said. For the first time, I heard just a hint of fear in his voice.
We're here to help! Help me, please!
The shout got us moving again. Now we could see that the hallway took a sharp left up ahead. Saul kept his light on that, while I pointed mine into the rooms that branched off the hall. They were simple bedrooms, with ancient cots that folded down from the walls. Some of the rooms held crates or old equipment, but most of them were empty, except for the single, fold-down cot in each one. I sensed movement behind us and whipped my flashlight that way, glimpsing a figure darting into a room behind us.
There's someone behind us,
I whispered to Saul as we reached the left turn. We stopped again.
Are you sure?
I nodded.
He's in one of those rooms. He's following us. It's a he? What did he look like? Is he big? Does he have a weapon?
I shook my head.
I don't know. It was just a glimpse of his leg, I think. But it looked weird.
The strange sobbing resumed, much louder now that we were close. It sounded like the man was hyperventilating.
Listen, we're not here to start any trouble,
Saul said to the hallway behind us.
We don't care about anything but getting help for this guy, okay? So whatever you want, it's none of our business. We'll just get this guy and be on our way.
The hallway answered with silence. The man in the bathroom screamed for help again.
Did someone hurt you?
Saul asked, now calling out to the man in turmoil. There was no answer. Even the sobbing stopped. I thought maybe the man was dead. Then he called for help again.
What the fuck?
Saul said, shaking his head in frustration. I kept my flashlight pointed down the hall behind us, going over repeatedly what I had seen. The quick glimpse of a figure. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't a human leg I'd seen.
I think it's an animal,
I said.
What? What kind? Animals don't stalk humans. Maybe a cougar?
Saul shook his head.
Which room did it go into?
I pointed.
Fourth one down on the right. Stay here and watch my back. Shout if you see anything.
The injured man shouted for help from the bathroom again. Without thinking, I turned my flashlight that way, shining it down the empty hallway.
Hold on!
A squelching noise erupted from the direction Saul had gone. I turned and shone my flashlight on Saul's back. He stood on his tiptoes, shoulders hunched forward, his own flashlight held limply in his right hand. I blinked, trying to compute what I was seeing. Saul was twitching, his arms jerking and his body flinching back and forth. He dropped his flashlight, which hit the ground just a moment before his size 18 feet left the floor. That was when I glimpsed whatever was on the other side of him, previously blocked by his bulk. His attacker's feet weren't human, although they had 5 toes on each limb. Protruding from each toe was a curved black claw. The thing that came to mind was a bear's feet, but there was no fur, only gnarled skin so dark it was almost black. The ankle joints on each leg were thick with bulbous protrusions, as though tumors had sprouted there. My eyes traveled up, but the rest of the creature was blocked by my half-brother's body. Blood splattered the floor between the two of them. I took a step forward to help Saul, but as I did so, the back of his shirt poked out as if something sharp had just protruded from his body. And as blood soaked into the fabric of his tan-colored shirt, I knew that was what had happened. The shirt settled again, but Saul's body kept twitching in time to a horrific squelching sound. More blood splattered the floor, soon followed by a tangle of intestines dropping meatily to the wet floor. I turned and ran, darting through the first door I saw, finding myself in a large bathroom with 5 toilet stalls, 5 sinks, and 6 showers.
Help!
I ran toward the man's voice, hoping he could provide some form of sanity for me to latch onto. I raced down to the showers, 3 on each side of the bathroom. I aimed my light into each of them until I found the source of the cries for help. But as I stood there, my light shining into the last shower stall on the left, I found myself frozen with terror. The thing in the shower wasn't so much a man as a pile of deformed body parts. My eyes glanced over him repeatedly, but for several long moments, I was unable to make any sense of what I saw. It was clear he had been severely injured, presumably by the creature that had just killed my brother, but there were other things wrong with him. As far as I could tell, the wounds that had been inflicted on him had partially healed, but not in any normal way. Growths of stretched maroon skin bubbled out from these horrific wounds. His left arm, which had been nearly torn off at the shoulder, now stuck up from his body at an odd angle, held there by bulbous formations of that bumpy, strange-looking skin. The right arm was still in working order, and he held it out toward me, begging for help. His right foot was gone, but the skin had fused with his intact left leg at the calf. His clothes hung in blood-stained tatters from his body, but I could tell that the strange growths weren't only confined to his injuries. His clothes bulged with protrusions nearly everywhere I looked. But it was his face that shocked me the most. It looked as if the creature had slashed him across the left side of his head. That entire side was a mass of dark, deformed skin. His lifeless left eye protruded from a small mountain of flesh next to his half-deformed nose. His right eye still blinked, and the emotion there affected me deeply as my gaze finally rested on it.
Help me!
He said, still breathing rapidly. As I opened my mouth to ask him what had happened, there was movement from the bathroom door. Turning my flashlight that way, I saw an enormous creature that had most likely once been a bear. It was deformed in places, although not as bad as the man lying in the shower stall. The bear's skin was dark gray, its eyes full of confused rage, its blood-covered mouth hanging open to reveal a deformed and bulbous tongue. It paused for a moment, turning its head slightly away from the light. Then it dropped onto all fours and rushed toward me. Panic gripped me as I spun, looking for some way out or something to defend myself with.
Get behind me!
The man said.
Get behind me now!
I had no other options, so in my panicked state, I did what he said, crowding into the shower, stepping on the man and tripping in my haste. He cried out in pain as I rolled over him. Then I was off and standing with my back in the shower corner. The bear creature stopped just outside the stall and reared up on its hind legs, letting loose a distorted roar that sounded as if it had come from deformed vocal cords. But it didn't move any closer. Its eyes looked from me to the deformed man and back again, its nose twitching. It roared once more, propelling the stench of rotten meat and slow death into my face. Then it backed away.
Can you carry me?
The man asked.
If you can carry me, we can get out. It won't touch you if you carry me. Why?
I asked, listening to the bear make its way back toward the bathroom door.
I'm bad meat,
He said, managing a little laugh at the end.
I've been down here for days, and the thing hasn't come near me since it first attacked. It did this to you? Can you carry me or not? Can you hold a flashlight?
I asked, pressing the tool into his right hand. He gripped it. I squatted and got my arms underneath him. feeling moisture pass from his skin to mine. I levered him up so he was propped on his one good leg. Then I put my shoulder into his stomach and got him into a firefighter's carry. He cried out as I lifted him, but after that, he quieted down and managed to point the flashlight at my feet, even though his arm was hanging down behind my back.
Go!
He gasped.
Hurry!
I went, taking little steps, hoping my back didn't give out. As I reached the hallway outside the bathroom, I saw the bear to the right. On instinct, I turned the other way, heading farther into the bunker.
Stop!
The man cried.
Not that way! There's some kind of chemical leaking out of storage barrels down there. You have to go the way you came.
The thing is that way.
It won't touch you, I promise.
I turned around and headed toward the bear creature. My heart slammed around in my chest as I faced off against the thing. I wanted to drop the man right there and run the other way, weird chemicals or not. But I doubted there was an exit that way. So I steadied myself and took a step toward the creature. It grunted and backed away, nose twitching. I took another step, and the creature kept its distance. I worked my way down the hallway in this manner until I came to Saul's body. I didn't want to look, but I had to navigate around the gory mess, clenching my teeth against my crushing sense of loss. Then I was past, and the bear had backed itself into one of the rooms on the right. The stairs were difficult, and by the time we reached the top, my legs were shaking. But there wasn't much farther to go. I could hear the bear behind us, but by then, I knew the man was right. It wouldn't attack. It was afraid of him. When we got outside into the sunshine, I turned and shut the main door to the bunker, shifting the handle so it was fastened. It wasn't locked, but I had to take the chance that the bear wouldn't be able to open it from the inside. I couldn't carry the man any farther. I set him down as gently as I could on the side of the road and then stood up. I wiped the sweat off my face with one hand. My eyes were stinging from sweat, so I wiped at them with the backs of my hands. It didn't help. I pulled out my phone, and as I stepped away from him, searching for a signal, I realized my skin was starting to burn where I'd touched the man. I looked down at my bare arms and saw a little red bubble slowly forming there. I could feel the man's one good eye on me, mouth open and anguish building. I looked at him. A single tear traveled down from his one good eye.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to see the sky one more time. I'm sorry.
I looked back at my arms, thinking about how he had mentioned dangerous chemicals. He must have crawled or limped into the spilled chemicals right after the bear attacked him, and he still had some of the stuff on him. The burn was turning into a searing pain that seemed to sink deeper into my arms, even as it traveled through my body. My skin bubbled more violently. I felt it happening on my shoulder, the side of my neck, and the ear that was pressed against him as I carried him. I cried out at the pain and fell to my knees. Then, as the burning started on my face, I recalled wiping the sweat away with the same hand I had used to secure him on the journey up. I blinked as blinding pain erupted in my eyes. The world went blurry as I rubbed at my eyes. The pain went to a crescendo. Then the world went completely dark, and all I could do was scream. Story 3. The Key to Survival.
No,
I said, shaking my head.
I can't do it again. I can't. I'll puke. So puke.
Lonnie said.
Once your stomach is empty, you'll have a little motivation.
I ignored Lonnie, still shaking my head, eyes fixed on Davian, who sat across from me in a reclining chair. His deep-set, dark eyes still exuded kindness and sympathy, but not so much as they had a year ago. Like all of ours, his face had grown gaunt from slowly starving. But he still had a commanding presence, and, as I had during every tribulation of the last year, I looked to him for reassurance. This time, there was little to be found.
You agreed?
Davian whispered. his voice seeming to fill the entire bunker, even though he wasn't at anything approaching full volume. Lonnie leaned over from his side of the couch and gripped my arm.
You don't do it. You don't eat.
My stomach, which had long ago gone beyond simple hunger, felt like a fist that kept tightening on itself, squeezing every molecule of air out as the minutes passed. The three of us spent most of our days in what passed for the bunker's living room, conserving our energy for survival. Sure, we got up to use the bathroom, and Davian got up to check the air quality sensors several times a day, but otherwise, we stayed put. We had read every book in the bunker many times over, had watched every DVD, listened to every CD, and played every card game. Now, all we did was sit and drift into our own little hunger-fevered worlds, until, of course, it was time to harvest. We did it once a week, taking turns. It was my week, but I couldn't fathom facing it again. I tried to jerk my arm away from Lonnie, but I didn't have the strength to succeed. And he hung on tight, digging his fingers into my minuscule muscle.
You know what happens when you don't pull your weight? We all agreed.
Lonnie sounded like a ghost, and I didn't dare look at him. His bulging eyes and protruding cheekbones only gave his rodent-like face a more disturbing quality that bordered on inhuman. But it was true. We had all agreed, even if that conversation, which had lasted the better part of a week, seemed like it had happened in a dream. We weren't the same people as we had been when we'd rushed into the bunker over a year ago. Not even close. We had gone from being co-workers, employed by an uber-rich bachelor, to being rats trapped underground, struggling to survive.
What about the air?
I asked Davian.
Can you check it? I checked earlier.
Davian said.
It's still not safe. Check it again, please.
Davian sighed, and I thought for a moment that the former head of security was going to deny my request, but he stood up from the lounge chair and shuffled toward the control room. I got to my feet and followed him on shaky legs, head swimming from the exertion of standing. We passed the kitchen on the left and the pantry on the right, with its closed door. I did my best not to look at it. Soon enough, we were in the control room. Davian didn't bother sitting down at the chair in front of the computer. He woke the screen up, clicked around, and then brought up a digital gauge displaying a complicated set of numbers. He studied them for a moment as I stood by, hands clasped hopefully in front of my chest. When he shook his head, my hands dropped to my sides.
See?
He pointed at the screen.
It's still not breathable out there. I'm sorry. We're stuck in here for a while yet.
I hadn't understood how to read the numbers, even when my brain was operating at full capacity. Now, as I slowly starved to death, it was like looking at the stream of numbers from the Matrix and trying to make sense of them. It was impossible. But Davian knew. As head of security, he had been in charge of learning the system so he could teach Mr. Maddox. He stepped to me and grabbed my shoulder.
I'm sorry, Blaine, but you have to do it. It's your turn.
We shuffled back to the kitchen, where Davian left after a brief word of encouragement. I found the tray of supplies in their place on the stainless steel counter and picked them up, turning to the closed pantry door. My stomach clenched again, and I felt a watery looseness in my bowels. I shut my eyes and thought about that first night, when those of us remaining at work had received the emergency alert on our phones. It was Davian and Lonnie who had arrived at the garage first, even before Mr. Maddox. I stood with the cloth in one hand and my phone in the other, having been interrupted in the middle of polishing Mr. Maddox's orange Lambo. The two men ran through the open garage door and stopped when they saw me. We all shared a look. At first, I thought they meant to steal a car and drive off, but after a short pause, they darted forward toward the empty bay next to the Lambo.
Come on,
Davian said. grabbing my arm and bringing me over into the next bay, where there was a rectangular oil pit built into the garage floor.
Hey!
I stopped and turned at the sound of Mr. Maddox's voice as he hustled into the garage, looking like a frightened horse and holding a pistol, which he pointed at us.
You're not going down there, goddammit!
He shouted. I had no idea what he was talking about. Since I wasn't on the security team, I didn't know about the bunker. Not then. I was still trying to make sense of the seek immediate shelter alert I had received on my phone.
There's more than enough room and supplies to last us all months,
Davian said in a reasonable tone.
I don't give a shit.
Maddox said in his raspy old man voice.
It's my bunker. You're going to leave us out here to die?
Lonnie asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Mr. Maddox said nothing. He rushed toward us, wearing his evening getup, khaki pants and a sweater that cost more than my entire wardrobe. His pistol wavered as he came, but not by much. Davian still held onto my arm, and Lonnie stood beside him. The stairs down into the oil pit were just a few feet away.
Back up,
Maddox said, poking the air with his pistol. We backed up. Once he felt it was safe, he stepped between us and the oil pit, his back to the gap. He seemed to be studying us, and I saw his eyes soften as the moments stretched on. I was so occupied looking at Maddox and his gun, I didn't see the chef, Sonia, coming up behind him until she plunged the knife into the side of his neck. Davian jerked me out of the way as Maddox fired once reflexively, the bullet ricocheting off the floor nearby. He spun around, knife still sticking out of his neck, and attempted to shoot Sonia. Lonnie lurched forward and shoved Maddox, sending him toppling into the oil pit. He landed in such a way that it ripped the knife out of his neck and the gun out of his hand. We all stood around the oil pit and watched him bleed out. Then, as the ground shook with the first distant explosions, we came to our senses. Davian led the way, stepping through the puddle of Maddox's blood, lifting the secret trapdoor at the bottom of the oil pit and ushering us down to the bunker's entrance. He punched the code in and got us all inside. We thought for sure we would be able to come out in a month or two, max. That wasn't the case. Now, a year on, we'd completely changed. Those people who had all been united against Maddox were barely holding it together now. I thought about all this as I stood in front of the pantry door, although I tried my best not to remember. It didn't help things any. It made them worse. But I knew I had to do it, or I wouldn't eat. Composing myself, I stepped forward and balanced the tray of supplies with one hand while opening the door with the other. Stepping inside, I flipped on the light, illuminating Sonia. Or what was left of her. We'd already eaten so much of her, but she had been the largest among us, with the most fat. We knew she would last the longest, as her body could use the fat as energy before it started to attack the muscle. Wearing only her stained and soiled underwear and a bra, she flopped around on the floor, fighting against her binds. But she had no arms anymore. They both ended at just beyond the shoulder joints in bandaged nubs. One of her legs was gone up to the knee, and the other was missing her foot. She shouted and grunted, but she couldn't make words because Lonnie had cut her tongue out long ago. We had split it. It wasn't much, but it was delicious. She stared accusingly with her dark eyes, shouting wordlessly, flopping around in smeared shit and piss. When we first endeavored to eat her, we had all agreed to take turns cutting and cleaning. But as the other limited provisions dwindled and our energy with it, we stopped with the daily cleaning. We just let her go to the bathroom in her underwear and only cleaned her once a week when we did the cutting. That was my first order of business, getting Sonia cleaned up so I could cut her without contaminating the meat. Only after I did the cutting would I feed her some rice and beans, the only two food sources we had left, aside from Sonia, of course. The amount that we gave her was well worth the fresh meat we got in return. The three of us had talked long and hard about it whenever Sonia was asleep for the better part of a week. Planning ahead was key. We couldn't wait until everything ran out to eat her. We had to plan ahead. We couldn't survive on rice and beans alone. Not for long. Sonia continued to yell and wiggle around, her eyes fixed on me. That was the hardest part. Looking at her eyes, feeling her eyes look at me. We had been friendly back before this whole thing. She had, on several occasions, snuck me some food from the kitchen. Twice, I let her drive one of Mr. Maddox's expensive cars while the boss was away. I had liked her back then. I still did. But I liked living more. As I pulled on gloves and set about cleaning up, the feel of her eyes on me was like two red-hot pokers pressing into my flesh. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. She wouldn't stop staring. Even when she tired herself out and stopped flopping around, she wouldn't stop staring. I felt the creeping hand of insanity gripping the back of my neck, and not for the first time. Last time, I had been tasked with cutting and cleaning. I had nearly taken the knife to my own foot instead of hers. But now, with those eyes, I couldn't concentrate. My stomach clenched impossibly tight, causing me to double over. Her eyes prodded me as I gripped my stomach with soiled gloves. They prodded me as I let out a whine. They prodded me as I hissed for her to stop looking at me. I reached absently for the knife, feeling them prodding all the time, accusing and blaming. Breathlessly, I gripped the knife in one gloved hand and pressed her head to the floor with the other. I looked into those eyes, those prodding, poking eyes, and I knew they had to go. The knife went in easily enough, slicing through eyelid and conjunctiva and cornea and lens and pupil. It came out covered in a red, jelly-like substance, but it went in again just as easily. Then there was the other eye to get rid of, and I did. I stabbed and stabbed until I could no longer feel those poking, prodding eyes. But by the time I was done, I realized I had gone too deep. Sonia no longer moved. Her chest didn't rise and fall. She was dead. I had killed her. I stood up and walked numbly out to the living room, knife still in my gloved hand.
Where's Davian?
I asked, seeing only Lonnie in the room. Lonnie glared at me with open disdain, sensing something was wrong.
He's in the bedroom, sleeping. Said he wasn't feeling good. What's wrong with you? I think we need to butcher and refrigerate her now. The meat won't keep for that long if we do that now. Freezer's still broken. Well, what did you do, Blaine? She wouldn't stop looking at me. Jesus Christ.
Lonnie stood up, swaying for a moment before coming toward me and grabbing my left arm. He dragged me into the pantry and looked at the mess I'd made. He turned to me, still gripping my left arm.
You fucking idiot! Now we have to butcher her! You better hope all the meat stays good with the goddamn freezer broken. Christ!
As he spoke to me, I could feel his eyes on the side of my face. I could feel them poking and prodding and blaming. I looked down at the bloody knife I still held in my hand. Then I looked up and met Lonnie's gaze, and saw Sonia's eyes staring back at me. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.